So today we are doing a deep dive into something that feels, well, both fundamental and maybe a little broken. International law.
It's a huge topic.
It is. And if you've been watching the news, you've probably noticed this massive paradox playing out on the world stage.
Right. There's this system, international law, that was designed to do two basic things: restrain power and prevent chaos.
And yet
what we see, what our sources are full of, are powerful states acting completely outside those restraints. You know, a kind of controlled chaos.
Exactly. I mean, we see presidents sanctioned, heads of state detained under certain warrants, assets frozen by hundreds of billions.
Entire economy strangled.
Right. And so often this happens without any kind of collective UN mandate. It seems like the very system built to stop states from acting alone is now being defined by them acting alone.
And it's so important to remember the history here. This wasn't some kind of feel-good moral poetry when it was created.
No.
It was a practical survival mechanism. It was born from the ashes of 2 world wars, and the thinking was really simple. Unrestricted power leads to catastrophe. Period. So they created these rules.
Like sovereign equality.
Sovereign equality, non-intervention, a ban on the use of force, except in very specific cases like self-defense or when the Security Council approves it.
So the mission for this deep dive, really, is to get past the headlines and figure out if these rules are still practical restraints or if they become, well, as one of our sources put it, just optional.
Enforced only when it's convenient for the powerful.
So what happens to the rules when power starts arresting power?
That is the core question we need to answer.
Okay, so let's start at the absolute bedrock of this whole system, the idea that sort of defines the state itself, sovereign immunity, SI.
Sovereign immunity is the cornerstone. Its function is. It's often misunderstood. It exists for one very pragmatic reason: to stop international relations from just collapsing into an endless series of vendettas.
So you can actually talk to each other.
Right. You can't have your diplomats or your head of state worrying about being arrested every time they travel for a summit. The whole system would just seize up.
And we're not just talking about an individual politician here, are we? The sources really stress that a sitting head of state, they embody the entire nation.
They do. They embody the sovereignty, the continuity of governance, the legal personality of the state itself. If you strip that immunity...
You're not just going after a person.
Exactly. You're effectively stripping the state of its ability to function on the global stage. That's why, historically, SI was considered absolute. No arrest, no detention, no coercive jurisdiction. Full stop.
So when a state moves to arrest a sitting leader, which we've seen threatened more and more, that's not just a legal event. It's what you called it, a political earthquake.
It is. Think about the functional risk. It doesn't just damage diplomacy, it paralyzes it. It eliminates neutral ground. It guarantees tit-for-tat retaliation. The risk is that international trust just completely breaks down.
And the old way was that exceptions were supposed to be rare.
Rare, collective, multilateral. You needed a broad consensus. But the huge shift our sources point to is that these exceptions are now becoming unilateral. That consensus is just dissolving.
Okay, so if that bedrock is cracking, how is it happening? What are the actual mechanisms being used on the ground to engineer this erosion?
We've basically transitioned from one system to another. The old one was collective, it was neutral, it was institution-driven.
The UN, for instance.
Right. The new system is selective, it's power-driven, and it's politically aligned. The enforcement isn't coming from the center anymore, but from powerful states or their alliances.
You mentioned sanctions earlier, and those are obviously the big one. But can you give us an example of this jurisdictional creativity the sources talk about? How are they actually seizing assets and restricting travel?
Well, the most eye-opening example is how they use allied networks to create a kind of fake universal blockade. So a powerful state will impose its own sanctions, but then it leans on its allies in banking, in payment systems like SWIFT, air traffic control, to enforce them.
So it looks like a global action, but there's no actual global legal backing for it.
Precisely. The source material shows that this jurisdictional creativity is often just finding a tiny loophole in an allied nation's domestic law, like an anti-money laundering rule, to justify seizing another country's central bank assets, even if the UN has said nothing.
Which brings us back to your point about a permission-based order.
It does, because if one state or a bloc can interpret the law, enforce the law, and judge the law however it wants, and then exempt itself from those same rules,
The whole structure changes.
it's not a rule-based order anymore where the rules apply to everyone. It's a permission-based order. And the currency of permission isn't justice. It's economic leverage and military power. If you're strong enough, you just grant yourself permission.
That makes a terrifying amount of sense. Okay, let's dig into the legal justification that's often used for this. Universal jurisdiction, UJ.
UJ.
In theory, it sounds great. It's the ultimate democratic check on power.
The theory is noble, yes. The idea that some crimes, genocide, torture, are so awful that they offend all of humanity and so any state can prosecute them, it sounds like the purest form of justice.
But as you said, we're in a permission-based system. So how does UJ become a tool of power instead of a tool of justice?
The problems are systemic. First, there are no uniform standards. What one country calls justice, another calls a political show trial. Second, it's not applied consistently. But the real failure, the critical failure, is the selectivity.
Why are some leaders pursued, sometimes decades after they leave office, while others who do very similar things are just ignored?
And that's the question you, the listener, have to ask yourself. When the investigations and the indictments always seem to mirror geopolitical alignments, what are you really looking at?
You're not looking at law.
If the legal spotlight only ever shines on your adversaries and never on your allies, or God forbid, on yourself, it stops being justice. And the sources are crystal clear on this. Selective justice is not justice, it is lawfare.
Lawfare. That's a word we really need to unpack. It's the strategic use of law to achieve a political or military goal.
And this is where it gets really clever. Lawfare is an incredibly effective, low-cost weapon. Unlike a traditional war, it leaves no smoke. It produces no rubble. There's no immediate moral outrage on the streets.
It just works silently through courts and banks and media narratives.
Exactly. So the key difference isn't the tool itself. A sanction might be technically legal in your own country, it's the intent. The goal isn't really accountability for victims.
The goal is geopolitical.
It's delegitimization, it's narrative control, it's isolating an economy. Its success is measured by how much a country's international standing drops, or how hard it is for its leaders to travel. When you weaponize law like that, it's no longer restraining power, it's serving it.
But hang on, I have to push back here because this is crucial. Isn't the counter-argument that these messy, selective actions are the only way to hold bad actors accountable when the Security Council is paralyzed by vetoes? Otherwise, don't we just let dictators operate freely?
That is the essential conflict, and our sources absolutely acknowledge that frustration. But the fundamental answer they provide is this. Flexibility for the strong just means instability for everybody else.
Because what you do today
Sets a devastating precedent for tomorrow. Even if it's for a morally satisfying goal, the stronger you are, the more flexible the law becomes for you, and that creates a system of asymmetric accountability.
which brings us to the systemic fallout and the silence of the institutions that are supposed to be guardians of the rules, the UN.
Yeah.
We see a total absence of Security Council resolutions on many of these actions. No General Assembly consensus, almost no institutional pushback.
And that silence, it's often misinterpreted. People think it's neutrality or maybe even tacit approval. It's neither.
It's what?
It's structural paralysis. The UN system was designed for the world of 1945, for a very specific balance of power and a very specific idea of sovereignty.
So you're saying the UN is like a fire department designed for wooden houses, but now the whole world is building with steel and glass. The tools are just obsolete.
That's a perfect way to put it. The powerful states find it's just easier to bypass the institutions entirely. And every time enforcement happens without a UN mandate, the organization doesn't just lose relevance, it hemorrhages authority.
And once authority goes, legitimacy is right behind it.
Which leads us to maybe the most critical point in this whole deep dive. The dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
Every unilateral action you take today is basically an instruction manual for your adversary to use tomorrow.
So even if we agree with the moral goal today,
We're accepting that any leader can be targeted tomorrow without collective approval. The rules you bend for your side will be used against you by the other side next week.
and we have to be clear, this doesn't protect smaller states.
Oh, it terrifies them. Absolutely. It pushes them into dangerous defensive postures. They see the institutions failing, so they start looking for security blankets.
Like alliances based on fear
Or even nuclear hedging. They start to believe that only hard power, not rules, can guarantee their survival. So, ironically, the very actions justified as strengthening global justice might be what's accelerating the collapse of the entire system.
And it's so easy to frame this as a West versus the rest fight, but the sources are pretty clear. This is about structure, not ideology.
It's all about asymmetric accountability. I mean, you see powerful Western states fiercely rejecting international jurisdiction the second it targets them or their officials. They're the first to invoke sovereignty when it's convenient and the first to erode it for others.
That double standard really proves the point.
It does. The issue isn't whether any one government deserves to be targeted. The issue is that the law can't survive if it's only enforced against some and not others.
It sounds like a pretty bleak, almost cynical view of where we are. But the sources did point to an interesting counterpoint, an alternative: India's approach.
Yes, India's policy is a really necessary pause for thought. They tend to avoid the loud gestures, the rush to unilateral enforcement. Their strategy is all about dialogue, preserving institutions, and resisting setting these kinds of precedent-setting interventions.
Is that just idealism, or is it strategic?
Oh, it's deep strategic calculation. It's driven by a core belief that for a large, non-aligned power, long-term stability requires honoring the rules, even when it's inconvenient. Their whole principle is that rules that are bent today will break tomorrow.
And when they break.
They rarely, if ever, favor the restrained. They understand the long-term cost of these short-term power plays.
So given all this, the erosion, the lawfare, the paralysis, where does this leave the global order? What are the possible paths forward?
The sources really lay out three paths. The first is, the optimistic one, a fundamental reform of our international institutions.
Yeah.
But that's incredibly slow and complex, and the powerful states who benefit from the current broken system will resist it.
Okay, what's path number two?
The second is we just openly accept a purely power-based order. At least it would be honest. But it would be profoundly destabilizing. It would guarantee that the weakest nations suffer immediately.
And the third path? The one we seem to be on.
The third is what we're doing now, the continued pretense of rules, but with selective enforcement. And that's the most dangerous path of all, because it keeps up the illusion of order while it's actually gutting the system's credibility from the inside. And history shows that pretense always collapses faster than honesty.
Wow. It's a powerful thought. The international law was never meant to be just ornamental. It was supposed to be a hard, practical restraint.
And that really brings us to the core finding of this deep dive. If law only exists when power permits it, if it's flexible for the strong and rigid for the weak, then it just fundamentally ceases to be law.
It becomes something else.
It becomes language. It becomes a narrative. It becomes a justification for actions the powerful were going to take anyway. And when that happens, those who lack power don't become safer. They just become silent.
That shift from law as a restraint to law as a justification is the most crucial thing to take away from this.
In global affairs, good intentions matter so much less than the precedents you set. The actions being taken now, justified as necessary, are setting precedents that all but guarantee the breakdown of the system tomorrow.
So for you, the learner, we'll leave you with this final provocative thought. If precedents truly matter more than intentions, what is the first precedent you believe needs to be universally reaffirmed to restore the authority of international law? And why might the most powerful states secretly prefer this structural paralysis over real clarity? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Thank you for joining us on this Strategic Vanguard podcast. If you found value in this analysis, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you fresh podcasts every Monday here on YouTube and Rumble, and you can also catch the audio versions on Spotify and Amazon Music. Just search for Strategic Vanguard Podcast. For more insights, articles, and discussions, subscribe to our blog at strategicvanguard.com. Your support helps us grow and bring you more in-depth analysis on defense, geopolitics, and strategy. Until next time, stay informed, stay strategic.